The morning began with a hush that was different from silence. It was the kind of quiet that lives only in the moments before the world remembers itself, when the light has barely touched the land and the air still carries the memory of night. The forest was wrapped in that pale stillness. Dew gathered on every leaf and blade of grass, small droplets of glass catching the first uncertain rays of dawn. Between the trees, the mist lingered, a soft veil that drifted through the low branches, moving with the slow rhythm of a sleeping world. Somewhere among the roots and ferns, beneath the shelter of an old oak, a faint spark stirred. It was small, almost hesitant, a pulse of golden light that flickered once and then again, as if testing its own strength. The spark belonged to a creature that had always carried light within it. Pikachu opened its eyes to the dim forest glow. For a long moment, it did not move. It simply watched as the first beam of morning found its way through the canopy and brushed across the ground. The light touched the fur along Pikachu's back, and the small static charge it carried hummed faintly in response. Not a burst, not a jolt, but a whisper of electricity meeting the warmth of day. The air itself seemed to hum in tune. The forest had its own current, the slow energy of life, rising with the sun. The trees exhaled faint tendrils of mist. The earth beneath Pikachu's paws felt alive, each vibration of the soil carrying the distant rhythm of roots and rivers. Pikachu stretched, feeling the small crackle of static between its fur. The charge was soft this morning, not wild or restless. It pulsed with calm, flowing gently, rather than sparking outward. There was peace in this energy, a kind that Pikachu had come to recognize. The peace that comes after choice, when something inside no longer resists. But this peace was new. It had taken time to find it. Once, the thought of evolution had been everywhere, a word that echoed through battles, victories, and moments of weakness. Evolution meant strength. It meant progress. It meant something larger, brighter, faster. The world seemed to expect it, to demand it even. And yet Pikachu had chosen not to change. That choice had not been rebellion. It had been understanding, a realization that what it already was had meaning enough. The world had told Pikachu it could become something greater, but the truth that morning whispered was different. That greatness and completeness are not the same. The forest accepted this truth without question. It did not ask the trees to become mountains, or the rivers to turn to sea. Everything existed as it was meant to, growing only in the ways that honored its essence. The breeze passed through the canopy above, stirring the leaves. Each movement caught the light, scattering gold through the mist. The sound of the wind and the faint electric hum beneath Pikachu's fur merged into one soft harmony, a symphony of nature and energy, of stillness and motion. The morning deepened. The mist thinned. Distant cries of other Pokémon rose faintly. A flock of Pidgey calling to the new day. A rustle of Rattata in the underbrush. Life was waking again, each creature finding its rhythm within the same eternal pulse. Pikachu listened to them with quiet recognition. It did not feel separate from them, nor above them. It was simply part of the same great field of existence, a spark among sparks. The oak tree that sheltered Pikachu was old, its bark rough and scarred from storms long past. But through those scars ran veins of living sap, and along its branches grew leaves that caught the light in gentle waves. Pikachu had made its home beneath this tree many times before. It was a place of balance, where shadow and light met, where roots held the earth and the wind whispered through the high branches. Pikachu climbed to its feet and took a few steps forward. The dew glistened on its paws. Each step left a small trace of static, a soft flash that faded almost instantly. It moved slowly, not with the energy of battle or excitement, but with the deliberate calm of one who understands its place. As it reached a small clearing, the forest opened around it. The sunlight had grown stronger now, reaching through the mist and touching the world in gold. The clearing was filled with low flowers, pale blue and white, their petals trembling in the faint wind. Pikachu paused at the edge, letting its gaze rest on them. Electricity moved softly through its body, a quiet rhythm matching the beat of its heart. The power it carried was neither burden nor weapon. It was simply part of what it was, inseparable from its being. Evolution might have changed that. Perhaps it would have brought strength, speed, or form beyond this small, soft body. But it would have also brought distance. A step away from this exact harmony between self and world. Pikachu's tail flicked lightly, tracing a faint arc through the air. The movement stirred a ripple in the static field around it, sending tiny motes of golden light into the morning air. The particles drifted upward, catching the sunlight until they vanished into brightness. The forest answered. Somewhere, a stream murmured its endless tune. The sound was low and steady, as if the earth itself were humming. The gentle rush of water blended with the faint hum of electricity until both became one continuous sound, the breath of life itself, eternal and without division. Pikachu followed the sound. Through the trees, it found the small river that wound its way through the forest floor. Its surface mirrored the dawn sky, pale blue with streaks of soft pink and white. Pikachu approached the edge and looked down. The reflection stared back. A familiar face, eyes bright but calm, fur glowing faintly in the light. There was no longing in that gaze now, no question of what might be beyond this form. Only acceptance, deep, quiet, and certain. The surface rippled slightly, breaking the reflection into waves of color. Pikachu's image dissolved into fragments of gold and blue, each piece moving outward until the water was only light again. The ripples grew wider, touching the banks, bending reeds and grasses gently as they passed. Then, as all things in the forest did, they stilled once more. The charge within Pikachu's body settled too. The hum became softer, deeper, a tone that resonated through the quiet morning. The current no longer needed to escape. It existed perfectly contained, cycling endlessly within. The world around it seemed to breathe in rhythm. The breeze slowed. The trees ceased their restless motion. The sun hung low in the sky, pouring warmth through the branches. Every living thing within that space seemed to align for a moment, existing not as separate forms, but as a single, vast pulse. Pikachu stood at the river's edge and closed its eyes. There was no sound now except the faint crackle of energy and the quiet murmur of the stream. In that stillness, Pikachu felt everything: the roots deep in the soil, the faint currents of the water, the invisible air moving high above. Each part of existence touched another, connected not by form, but by essence. And within that connection, there was peace. It was the same peace that had filled the moment of refusal, the instant Pikachu had turned away from evolution, not out of pride or fear, but from understanding. Evolution was not rejection of the self, but it was also not an obligation. What Pikachu carried was enough. What Pikachu was whole. The forest seemed to agree. The wind rose softly again, brushing through the leaves with a sound like distant applause. The sunlight shimmered brighter on the water, and the faint spark on Pikachu's tail glowed just a little stronger, not in display, but in quiet affirmation. The morning deepened. The forest was awake, and Pikachu, standing beneath the old oak, and, before the endless world, felt a calm that reached beyond strength, a calm that belonged to understanding. The sun had climbed higher now, shedding its first shy light for a fuller, gentler warmth. The forest had changed its tone with it, from the pale hush of dawn to the quiet pulse of morning. The mist was gone, dissolved into thin ribbons that drifted through the canopy like smoke fading into air. In its place came the sound of movement, leaves trembling, small footsteps on the soil, and the occasional hum of distant wings. Pikachu walked along a narrow trail that wound between the roots of old trees. The path was ancient, shaped not by human hands but by the passage of countless Pokémon over many years. It bore the memory of their movements, faint prints pressed into the earth, small scars where battles once stirred the ground, and grooves where rain had carried the stories of seasons away. The air smelled faintly of moss and rain, though no storm had come. The scent was carried by the forest itself, by the endless exhalation of life in balance. Each breath Pikachu took filled its give, lungs with that scent, grounding it deeper into the rhythm of the world around it. The forest was not silent anymore, but its sounds were not noise, they were texture. The steady hum of Beedrill wings far away, the slow rustle of Caterpie in the undergrowth, and the soft padding of unseen Pokémon moving through the ferns. All of it wove together into one continuous soundscape, a voice that said without words that everything was alive, everything belonged. As Pikachu walked, small sparks flickered beneath its paws, not strong enough to burn, but bright enough to leave traces, tiny golden flashes that faded as quickly as they appeared. Each step was a pulse of energy grounding itself, an imprint of existence too fleeting to linger. The forest accepted the sparks with ease, absorbing them into the damp earth as if it had been waiting for them. Here and there, faint marks in the ground caught Pikachu's eye. They were old, but not forgotten. The shallow depressions where electric battles had once scorched the soil. The remains of static still whispering faintly beneath the roots. Pikachu paused near one of these places. The earth here was darker, richer. A memory lived in it. Not of conflict, but of energy, meeting energy, of two forces testing their harmony. The memory of what once had been a fight, and what now was simply part of the ground. Pikachu stood over it for a moment, not as a victor or a witness, but as a continuation. The sparks beneath its fur resonated faintly with a trace of the old current, the two frequencies aligning for a brief heartbeat before fading again. The path curved deeper into the woods. Above, the canopy grew thicker, turning the sunlight into patches of shifting gold that danced across the floor. The deeper Pikachu went, the quieter the forest became. Not silent, but measured. Every sound distant, deliberate, calm. There was an ancient rhythm here. The wind no longer came in gusts, but in long, slow waves. The trees creaked, faintly as they moved with it. Even the water of the nearby stream had changed its tone, no longer a rushing current, but a gentle murmur that seemed to breathe with the earth. Pikachu continued forward, its steps light and even. Each breath came in tune with the rhythm of the place, as though the forest itself was breathing through it. The energy that once sparked restlessly now hummed in steady cadence, soft enough to feel like heartbeat instead of lightning. A clearing opened ahead, not wide, but circular, edged with stones that were half buried in moss. The stones were worn smooth, their shapes rounded by years of rain and roots pressing gently against them. Between them, the grass grew brighter, and at the center stood an old tree stump. Pikachu approached it slowly. The stump had once belonged to a tree of enormous size. Its center was hollow now, filled with soil and small flowers that had taken root where life had once ended. But even in its decay, the wood still held traces of its past, faint lines where lightning had struck long ago. The marks were shallow, but unmistakable. Thin black streaks running down the grain, etched into the wood like ancient writing. Pikachu touched the edge of the stump with its paw. A faint vibration answered, not electrical, but organic, the slow echo of energy long absorbed into the earth. It was as if the tree had once felt the same spark and kept a memory of it deep in its rings. Pikachu could almost hear it, a resonance so low and steady it was more sensation than sound. It sat there for a while, the stump beneath it warm from the morning sun. The forest had gone completely still again. Even the air seemed to pause. The only movement came from the soft rise and fall of Pikachu's breathing. and the faint glow that passed through its fur every few seconds, quiet pulses of electricity cycling endlessly through its body. Each pulse was different. Some were soft, some slightly sharper, some lingered longer before fading. But all were part of the same rhythm, the same song that Pikachu carried within it. Evolution would have changed that song, perhaps made it stronger, perhaps more complex, but it would have been a different melody altogether. And this one, this quiet pattern of energy and breath, was the one that belonged here, now, beneath these trees and this sky. After a time, Pikachu rose again. The air had changed once more, lighter now, moving more freely through the forest. The sunlight that slipped between the leaves had grown warmer, reaching deeper into the undergrowth. The small clearing shimmered faintly in that light, as if the air itself carried charge. Pikachu moved forward again, crossing the edge of the clearing and stepping back into the shade. The path ahead was faint, barely visible beneath the roots, but the way forward was not lost. The forest always offered direction, even when none could be seen. The ground began to slope gently upward. The trees grew closer, together, their roots rising and curling like frozen waves of wood. The earth was darker here, softer, and each step left a shallow print. As Pikachu climbed, faint motes of dust floated through the light, catching on static and glowing for an instant before vanishing. Near the top of the rise, the forest opened again. From there, the view stretched far across the valley below, a sea of green and gold, the tops of trees rolling into the horizon. In the distance, beyond the farthest ridges, a faint shimmer marked the outline of the ocean. The wind that came from that direction carried the scent of salt and distance, the smell of journeys that began long ago and still had no end. Pikachu stood there, letting the breeze wash through its fur, lifting faint traces of electricity into the air. Tiny arcs of light flickered along its cheeks, soft and harmless, merging with the sunlight until they became indistinguishable from it. The horizon was alive with movement, flocks of Pidgey, gliding in silence, small shapes darting through the treetops, and the faint shimmer of clouds drifting lazily across the distant sea. It was a world in motion, constant, cyclical, unending, and yet, even in all that motion, there was no pressure to move. The forest did not rush, the wind did not demand. Everything in the world seemed to whisper the same truth, that to be as you are, where you are, is enough. Pikachu closed its eyes again and let that truth sink deeper. The pulse of energy within it aligned once more with the rhythm of the forest. The wind, the distant sea, the hum grew softer still, until it felt more like the sound of the world breathing than electricity itself. The path behind was quiet. The path ahead waited. There was no need to hurry. The journey was not one of distance, but of being, a walk not toward change, but toward peace with what already was. And as the light shifted slightly, casting golden patterns across the ground, Pikachu stepped forward again. The forest, in its infinite calm, opened its way in silence. The forest sloped gently downward, leading toward a sound that had been growing slowly beneath the surface of the quiet. It began as a low hum, then deepened into a rolling whisper, and finally revealed itself as the song of a river winding through the roots and stones. The air grew cooler as Pikachu approached, and the scent of the world changed again, soft earth giving way to the clean sharpness of water touched by light. The river was wide but slow, its surface rippling with silver threads that caught the sun in trembling lines. Along its edge the moss grew thick, soft as sleep, and the stones were worn smooth by the endless passage of time. The current moved without hurry, carrying with it leaves, petals, and faint reflections that drifted like memories, half seen and half felt. Pikachu stepped close to the bank, paws sinking into the damp soil. A faint charge met the water's edge, a small electric whisper that fizzed and faded as the current accepted it. The surface rippled, answering in kind with patterns of light that shimmered and broke apart, only to reform moments later in perfect silence. The river seemed to hold something more than just water. Its movement carried a rhythm that felt older than the forest itself. The sound it made was not a single tone, but many, layered and patient, like voices speaking softly in a language no one remembered. Pikachu sat beside it, letting that sound fill the stillness inside its chest. Every drop that passed carried something unseen, the residue of distant storms, the warmth of faraway rain, the faint dust of mountains long eroded into memory. The river was a living map of journeys, flowing, merging, vanishing, and returning again in endless cycle. And in its reflection, Pikachu saw fragments of its own path. At first, the images were faint. They flickered like sunlight seen through the water, shapes that might have been trees or clouds, but slowly shifted into clearer forms. The forest around faded at its edges, replaced by faint echoes of the past. There was the open field of Pallet Town, its grass bright under the morning sun. There was the boy's silhouette, running, calling, but without sound or shape. There was the first battle, the first spark, the first choice. All of it drifted through the reflection, like stories retold by the current itself. Pikachu did not move. It watched as the images unfolded, not as memories to be relived, but as waves that came and went, each carrying a trace of who it had been. The current did not judge or linger. It carried everything with equal grace. The triumphs, the falls, the refusals. One image lingered longer than the rest. It was the memory of the stone placed before it, the Thunderstone, smooth and glowing with quiet power. The reflection of that light shimmered now on the surface of the river, golden and pulsing like a heartbeat. Pikachu could almost feel the hum again, the gentle pull of evolution, the call towards something different, larger, unknown. But the current did not pull toward it. Instead, it carried the reflection downstream, letting it dissolve into smaller fragments that danced in the ripples until they vanished completely. The water continued its path, unchanged, unhurried. The message was clear in its silence. The river did not keep what it carried. It did not hold the reflections that passed through it. Its strength was not in what it contained, but in what it released. To flow was not to change into something else. It was to remain movement itself. A faint breeze stirred the surface, and the reflection broke apart. Pikachu watched the fragments scatter, and then fade. The hum within its fur shifted slightly, less like a pulse and more like a sigh, long and even. It stepped into the water. The chill was sharp at first, but quickly softened into warmth as its body adjusted. Sparks rose from its fur, faint blue arcs that hissed against the surface and disappeared in curls of steam. The current wrapped gently around its legs, carrying away the traces of static. For a long time, Pikachu simply stood there, half in the water, half on the land. The world seemed to balance itself around that stillness. Light above, reflection below, breath and movement in perfect symmetry. The water's voice continued, not speaking but reminding, not teaching but showing. Every ripple became a heartbeat of time. Every shimmer became a reminder of impermanence. And through it all ran the same quiet truth, that nothing needed to become something else to be whole. The longer Pikachu stood there, the softer the electricity in its body became. What once surged and leapt now hummed gently, more rhythm than charge. It felt as though every atom of its being had found alignment with the water's movement, each one turning, releasing, and returning again in endless flow. Eventually, it moved again, slowly, stepping back onto the bank. The fur along its legs was wet, clinging and heavy for a moment before the warmth of its body began to dry it. As it shook itself, faint droplets flew outward, catching the sunlight like sparks reborn as light instead of fire. The forest accepted the motion quietly. A few leaves stirred, Somewhere distant, a wingull cried above the canopy, its voice brief and clean. Then the air settled again, and the stillness resumed, thicker now with a sense of continuity. Pikachu began to follow the river's edge, walking beside it as it wound deeper into the land. The current was constant, yet never the same, each turn revealing new reflections, each bend reshaping the light. At one point the path narrowed and the river cut sharply through stone. The sound deepened there, its voice turning to a low hum that echoed through the rocks. The air vibrated with it, and Pikachu felt the tone resonate inside its chest cavity, an inner echo of the current's depth. The stones themselves bore marks of time. Some were carved with lines where generations of water had worn them, smooth. Others were rough, broken by the pressure of unseen movements beneath the earth. And yet all of them belonged equally to the river's passage. The marks were not scars. They were records. Pikachu paused again, touching one of the stones with a paw. The surface was cool and smooth, vibrating faintly. It was a sound too deep to hear fully, but its presence was undeniable. In that vibration, there was no distinction between beginning and end, only duration. The air grew denser near the falls ahead. Pikachu could sense it before seeing it, the faint tremor that rippled through the ground, the taste of mist in the air. When it finally came into view, it was not large or dramatic, but quiet. A curtain of water falling from a high ledge, its descent so smooth it looked like a single thread of light. At the base of the waterfall, the pool glimmered like liquid glass. The surface trembled with ripples that radiated outward, dissolving into the wider river beyond. Mist drifted upward in slow motion, catching the sun in shifting halos. Pikachu approached the edge and gazed into the pool. Its reflection was there, but not still. The water's motion reshaped it endlessly, ears bending, eyes doubling, outlines blending with the current. It watched itself flicker and dissolve, reform and fade again, 1,000 times each minute. And for the first time, the sight did not unsettle it. It was no longer a distortion, but a truth. That identity, like the river, was movement. That even stillness contained endless flow. The hum inside Pikachu deepened again, no longer static or spark, but steady, quiet electricity in harmony with the world around it. It was not refusal that lived in it, but acceptance. Not resistance, but understanding. The waterfall's rhythm matched its own heartbeat. The air, heavy with mist, smelled of rain and renewal. Above, a few rays of light broke through the canopy, scattering across the surface like threads of gold. The river continued its calmer, eternal passage, neither rushing nor waiting. Pikachu watched for a long time, until even thought itself felt like part of the current, drifting, dissolving, returning to stillness. Then, slowly, it turned away. The forest awaited, the light shifting gently through the leaves. The river's sound followed behind it for a while, fading slowly with each step until it became nothing more than part of the air itself. No longer an echo, but a pulse within the silence. Pikachu walked on, its tail faintly glowing, its steps light as breath. The journey continued, and the current within and without moved as one. The wind began to change long before the clouds appeared. It was a subtle thing, an almost imperceptible shift in the weight of the air. The faint scent of ozone carried between the trees. The forest, which had moved with a slow, steady rhythm until now, seemed to pause as though listening. Every leaf, every blade of grass, turned slightly toward the direction of that distant hum. Pikachu felt it first, as a vibration beneath the surface of its skin. Not the bright, playful spark of energy it had always known, but a deeper pulse, a warning hum that moved like thunder through the bones of the world. It raised its head, eyes catching the pale shimmer that trembled above the canopy. The light was dimmer now, tinted faintly silver as the sun veiled itself behind the gathering haze. The air grew heavy. It was not fear that filled it, but anticipation, the deep, inevitable waiting that came before the world released its breath. Every living thing seemed to draw inward. Pidgey settled quietly into the branches. Small Pokémon slipped into burrows and hollows. Even the leaves stopped their restless dance, turning their undersides upward, silver in the dimming light. The first distant rumble came not from the sky, but from the earth. A long, slow vibration rolled through the soil, so deep it was felt rather than heard. Pikachu stood still, its tail faintly quivering with charge. There was no storm yet, no flash of lightning, no fall of rain. Only the potential, vast and quiet, pressing against the world from all sides. The scent of the forest changed again. It grew sharper, cleaner, filled with the taste of metal and distance. It was the smell that came before storms, a mixture of energy and memory, of old air being replaced by new. Pikachu breathed it in slowly, feeling it mingle with the electricity that lived in its blood. Lightning was not an enemy to it. It was kin. The pulse of storms was the same pulse that moved through Pikachu's own body, the same rhythm that flickered behind its fur. Yet even kinship carried weight. For in the balance between calm and chaos, there was always choice. How much to hold, how much to release, how much to let pass without interference. A faint shiver ran along Pikachu's back. The charge within it responded instinctively to the rising energy in the air, small sparks flickering between its ears. The forest dimmed further, the sky thickening into layers of deep gray. The stillness was absolute now, but no rain fell, no thunder broke. The tension grew without release. The sky swelled with energy, yet refused to let it go. It was as if the world had drawn in a breath and could not exhale. The air crackled softly, the fine hairs of Pikachu's fur lifting in response. It could feel every particle around it charged, suspended in waiting. And then, in that charged silence, the truth of its nature became clear again. Pikachu could summon lightning if it wished, could meet the storm, match it, command it. It had done so before, in countless battles and moments of survival. But power was not peace. The storm did not need its participation. The sky would break or hold on its own. So Pikachu stood there, in perfect stillness, letting the energy flow through it without grasping it. The static gathered at the tips of its fur, glowed faintly, then dispersed into the air. Each spark was accepted by the world without noise, without consequence. The potential of the storm met the calm of the forest, and between them, Pikachu became the bridge. Minutes passed, perhaps hours. Time lost its clear edges, replaced by the slow expansion and contraction of the air. Occasionally, a low rumble echoed across the horizon, distant and hollow, more memory than sound. But still, no lightning came, no storm arrived. Instead, the tension began to ease. The heavy scent of ozone thinned. The air grew lighter. The first beam of sunlight broke through the clouds like a gentle apology, spreading across the forest floor in thin golden lines. The storm that had been promised would not come today. Its energy, gathered and waiting, had chosen another place to release itself, or perhaps had dissolved entirely into balance. The forest exhaled again, long and slow. Leaves resumed their whispering. The small Pokémon emerged once more from their shelters, tentative at first, then freely. The hum of the world returned, unchanged and yet somehow renewed. Pikachu stood in the clearing, the light washing over it. It could still feel the faint echo of the storm in its fur, a soft, lingering hum that slowly melted into warmth. The power that had surged within was quiet now, absorbed, at peace. There was a lesson in that silence. Not every gathering of energy needed release. Not every pressure demanded transformation. Sometimes, the storm was not meant to strike at all. There's not every breasting of outstorm was lesson placed. Sometimes, its purpose was only to remind the world of what could be. Pikachu walked forward, paws pressing gently into the soft ground. The soil was dry, yet carried a faint coolness from the shadow of clouds. Above, the last remnants of gray drifted away, revealing wide blue sky. The calm that followed was deeper than before. It was not the calm of stillness, but of balance restored. The feeling that nothing had been lost, only returned to its rightful rhythm. A single leaf detached from a branch above, spiraling slowly down. Pikachu watched it land beside a patch of wildflowers, its motion as quiet as breath. There was electricity still in the air, but it no longer sought escape. It lingered like a memory of motion, a reminder of potential held in trust. Further down the path, the forest opened to a field. The grass moved gently in waves, golden where the sunlight touched it. Pikachu stepped into it, and the world widened again. The horizon was open, soft, endless. Every gust of wind that passed carried faint whispers of static, small, playful remnants of the storm that never came. They brushed against Pikachu's fur and dissolved, merging seamlessly into the flow of the day. It stopped for a moment, looking out across the open land. The clouds had broken apart completely now, scattered like fragments of old thoughts drifting away. The sky above was clear, endless, forgiving. In that moment, Pikachu understood that evolution was not the only form of growth. Some changes came not from transformation, but from patience, from learning when to hold still in the face of immense energy and simply let the world breathe. The power to act was still there, sleeping quietly beneath the surface. But power was no longer a question. It was an answer, one that did not need to be spoken aloud. The air shimmered faintly as the last traces of static faded. The forest behind whispered, the field ahead opened wide, and the balance between sky and earth returned to peace. Pikachu moved onward once more. Its steps made no sound. The storm that never came had left its mark, not as thunder, but as calm. The field opened like a breath, released after long restraint, wide and golden beneath the afternoon sun. The grass stretched in soft, undulating waves, each blade moving in rhythm with the slow wind that wandered through. The world here seemed to breathe differently, slower, gentler, unhurried. Pikachu stepped into the open, the transition from forest to meadow, so seamless it felt like waking from one kind of dream into another. The scent of pine and moss gave way to that of dry grass and sunlight. The ground was warm beneath its paws, holding the day's heat as though it had been storing it for this exact moment. The air shimmered faintly, not with stormlight, but with something quieter, like the trace of distant sound long faded into memory. At first, Pikachu thought it was the hum of its own charge, the gentle echo that always lingered beneath its fur. But then it realized the sound came from all around. It was not quite music, not quite wind. It moved through the grass, in soft patterns, rising and falling like breathing. Sometimes it resembled a voice, but not one that could be understood, more the echo of one, scattered and softened by time. The sound carried no words, no melody, yet it stirred something inside Pikachu that felt like remembering. This was the Meadow of Forgotten Voices. The name did not exist in any map or spoken tale, but the land knew itself by that title. Every gust of wind carried with it fragments of songs, once sung by the Pokémon who had lived here before. Their laughter, their cries, their calls to one another in seasons long past. Pikachu moved slowly through the grass, each step parting blades that brushed gently against its fur. The faint hum followed it, not louder or closer, but ever present, a constant whisper of something just beyond the edge of hearing. It was not tall, nor particularly remarkable, yet its surface was polished smooth, not by hands, but by the years of wind and rain. Around it, the grass grew shorter, as though paying respect. Pikachu approached, and as it did, the air changed again. The hum deepened, and the faint patterns of sound aligned into something that almost resembled harmony. The vibrations passed gently through the ground, up through Pikachu's paws, into its body. For a moment, it felt as though the earth itself was breathing through it, filling its chest with the rhythm of 1,000 lives. Intertwined, Pikachu sat before the stone. The meadow around it swayed in long, slow waves. The light of the afternoon was golden, heavy, and warm, filtering through the air with the softness of dust and water. The voices grew clearer, not sharp or separate, but collective. They were the voices of the wild, of time itself, moving through generations. The songs of Pokémon that had run, flown, and slept here since long before memory began. The sound was gentle but vast, a chorus of existence rather than individuals. The hum resonated through Pikachu's chest, vibrating gently in tune with its heartbeat. It closed its eyes and let the sound move through it, neither grasping nor interpreting. The melodies were not meant to be understood, only felt. The wind shifted again, and a faint spark rose from Pikachu's fur, catching the sunlight. The energy that once pulsed restlessly now flowed easily, harmonizing with the rhythm of the meadow. Every vibration, every breath, felt connected. Not separate lives, but one vast continuity. Time lost its edge. Moments blended, their boundaries dissolving. Pikachu could feel the weight of generations behind it. Each life, a note in the same unending song. The song was not of change, but of being. The music of identity accepted, of existence allowed. The sun began to dip slightly lower. The air thickened with the warmth of late day. Shadows stretched across the field, long and soft, joining one another like merging rivers. The voices grew fainter then, not vanishing, but receding into the deeper hum of the land. The song had been sung. The silence that followed was not emptiness, but completion. Pikachu rose and placed a paw lightly against the stone. The surface was cool now, even beneath the sunlight. It pulsed faintly with residual warmth, the last echo of the song settling into stillness. There were no markings, no carvings, only faint patterns, etched by time itself. But as Pikachu looked closer, it noticed something within the grain. Thin streaks of darker stone that curved like lightning frozen in motion. They were not deliberate, yet they felt meaningful, like the earth remembering the touch of sky. Pikachu felt the faint charge within it resonate with those lines. The hum returned for a moment, delicate and balanced, and then faded once more into quiet. The meadow had given its gift, not a lesson, not a message, but remembrance. To exist was to leave behind sound, even after silence returned. Every spark, every breath, every heartbeat left its tone. Within the fabric of the world, the voices that once filled this place had not vanished. They had simply transformed into resonance, forever moving, forever part of the air. Pikachu turned toward the west. The light there was changing. No longer gold, but deepening toward amber. The first sign of evening shimmered across the horizon. The grass seemed to glow from within, its edges illuminated by the sinking sun. The hum in Pikachu's body was softer now, steady and low. It no longer carried the tension of storms or the ache of decision. It was a quiet rhythm of acceptance, like the steady beat of waves against distant shorelines. It began walking again, following no clear path. The meadow's sound faded gradually behind it until all that remained was the whisper of wind moving through tall grass. But that whisper was enough. It was the continuation of the same song, even in silence. As Pikachu walked, faint shadows of flying Pokémon passed overhead, their silhouettes stretching across the ground in fleeting arcs. The sky above was vast, painted in slow gradients of orange and rose. The sun itself hovered low, its reflection mirrored faintly in Pikachu's dark eyes. Everything in the world was changing color. And yet, none of it felt like loss. It felt like transformation without departure, a slow shift in the tone of the same melody. When Pikachu reached the far edge of the field, it turned once more to look back. The stone stood small against the distance, surrounded by waves of golden grass. The faint hum could still be sensed, even from afar, woven into the air like an unbroken thread. Pikachu bowed its head slightly, a gesture not of farewell, but of gratitude. Then it turned again and stepped into the shade of the next grove, where the evening air waited cool and still. The meadow of forgotten voices fell behind, yet its resonance remained, a quiet echo inside Pikachu's chest, the lingering song of all who had existed and all who still would. Evening unfolded not as a sudden fall of darkness, but as a gradual surrender of light. The air cooled with patience, the day loosening its hold upon the earth with the soft grace of a fading melody. The forest ahead was different now, less dense, its edges washed in the muted hues of approaching dusk. Between the last reach of sunlight and the first veil of shadow stretched a space that felt both like arrival and departure. Pikachu stepped into that threshold, the meadow of forgotten voices fading behind it in a shimmer of gold. The sounds of the open field, wind, grass, distant hum grew faint, replaced by the slow, rhythmic murmuring of evening. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a river whispered again, though softer now, its voice muffled by distance and time. The ground beneath Pikachu's paws had changed. The soil here was cooler, fine with dust, marked by the faintest impressions of old paths long forgotten. Tiny fireflies had begun to emerge, their light pulsing gently among the roots. Each glow was brief and deliberate, appearing and vanishing like thoughts dissolving into stillness. The air shimmered faintly between light and shadow. It was neither day nor night, an hour that belonged to both, yet fully to neither. The forest seemed to hold its breath at that border, balanced perfectly between movement and rest. Pikachu walked slowly. The hum of electricity within it had softened into near silence. More rhythm than spark. A quiet resonance in tune with the deepening calm. Every few steps, a faint glimmer ran along its tail, as though catching the last reflections of sunlight retreating through the leaves. In the distance, something glowed, faintly blue. It was not fire, nor moonlight, but a gentle luminescence rising from the ground itself. Pikachu followed it, drawn not by curiosity but by the sense of continuation, as though the forest was guiding it toward the next movement of the same song. The light grew brighter as it approached, until the path opened onto a bridge made of smooth stone. It arched gracefully over a narrow river whose surface mirrored the sky in transition. One half reflected the last blush of sunset, warm and soft. The other shimmered with the pale silver of the rising moon. The bridge was small, but it felt ancient. Moss covered its sides, glowing faintly with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in time with the flow of water below. The air around it vibrated with stillness, the kind of stillness that was not absence, but presence held in perfect balance. Pikachu paused at the foot of the bridge. Here, everything was divided, yet united. Day above one side, night above the other, light and shadow touching, but never colliding. It felt like a moment made not for decision, but for understanding. As Pikachu stepped onto the stone, a soft hum rose from beneath its paws. The energy was faint, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably alive, the residue of countless crossings, perhaps. The bridge seemed to remember each traveler that had ever walked across it, holding their essence quietly within the grain of its stone. Halfway across, Pikachu stopped. Beneath it, the river's surface rippled with light. On one side, the reflection of the setting sun stretched in slow, golden waves. On the other, the silver reflection of the moon shimmered like breath upon glass. Between them was the faint line where day and night met, thin as thread, unbroken. eternal. Pikachu watched the two halves blend. The gold and the silver wove together in patterns of light that resembled electricity diffused through water. Soft, infinite, alive. For a moment, the entire surface of the river seemed to glow with quiet charge, and Pikachu's fur responded instinctively, the faintest spark rising and fading like the smallest heartbeat of the world. The hum of the bridge deepened, resonating softly through the soles of its paws. It was the same frequency that had echoed in the meadow, in the forest, in the storm that never came. The same silent rhythm that had followed Pikachu since dawn. The realization was simple and vast. It was not following the world's rhythm. It was the rhythm. The thought was not formed as words. It came as feeling, as pulse. To walk from one light to another did not mean to change. It meant to carry the same spark across the shifting colors of time. Pikachu stood there for a long while, bathed in the soft mingling glow of day and night. The air around it grew cooler. The first stars appeared overhead, faint and trembling. The last rays of sunset sank below the horizon, and the bridge was left in half-light, the kind of light that felt like memory more than presence. As the balance shifted, the hum of the world did not falter. The rhythm continued, now slower, deeper, tuned to the night. Pikachu's breath matched it unconsciously. In, out, charge, release, light, shadow. The river below had changed completely. Its surface was now silver, dark, and endless. The moon had risen, high enough to scatter its reflection into 1,000 ripples that looked like sparks resting on water. Each ripple moved with impossible gentleness, forming shapes that appeared and dissolved before the mind could name them. The sound of the river became the only sound in the world. Not loud, not sharp, only continuous. It was the voice of transition itself, the song of change without loss. Pikachu listened until it could no longer tell whether the sound came from outside or from within. When it finally stepped off the bridge, the forest on the other side was different. The air was cooler, washed clean by the night. The trees were taller, their trunks silvered by moonlight. Shadows no longer hid things. They revealed them, outlining each leaf, each blade of grass, in soft contrast. The stillness here was not the stillness of waiting, but of completion, the kind that came when all motion had found its balance. Pikachu walked slowly along the edge of the river, following its curve, through the moonlit grove. The light traced its outline in faint silver, glinting softly where its fur caught the reflection of stars. Every movement was deliberate, calm, almost ceremonial. After a while, the bridge was no longer visible behind it, hidden by the curve of land and the thickening trees. But the sense of crossing lingered, the awareness of having passed from one rhythm to another, yet remaining unchanged in essence. The night deepened. The sounds of nocturnal life began to rise softly. The flutter of wings, the low murmur of unseen creatures, the distant call of water echoing through stone. The world did not sleep. It merely shifted its tone. Pikachu paused beneath a tree whose branches arched like the ribs of a cathedral, wide and sheltering. It sat in the quiet shadow, breathing in the scent of night. Cool, damp, threaded with the faint sweetness of unseen flowers. Above, the stars shimmered with subtle motion. They flickered like sparks, some steady, some fading, quickly, others glowing for longer moments before vanishing. Pikachu's gaze followed them, and it felt a quiet kinship, a recognition that every light, no matter how distant, shared the same essence as the electricity within its small body. To be small did not mean to be lesser. To remain as one was did not mean to resist change. It meant to be steady enough to carry light across all hours of the world. The night breeze brushed gently against Pikachu's fur. The charge that lived there responded softly, not with a crackle, but with a hum, a faint whisper of energy moving in harmony with air and time. It did not seek to escape. It did not seek to transform. It simply existed, balanced perfectly between release and rest. Pikachu closed its eyes. The world breathed around it. The bridge, the meadow, the storm, the river, all of them flowed together into the same endless current. The hum within and the hum without were one. The twilight bridge faded into memory behind, but its lesson remained. Every transition, every dusk and dawn, was only another passage in the infinite rhythm of being. Nothing truly ended. It only changed its light. And so, Pikachu slept, peacefully, silently, surrounded by the calm electricity of the night. Morning arrived quietly, not with the brilliance of dawn, but with a slow unfurling of light that touched the world one leaf at a time. The air was still cool, carrying the weight of the night's calm, and each breath of wind felt like the faintest awakening. Dew had gathered in perfect silence, resting upon every blade of grass, every petal, every root, as though the forest itself had wept gently in its sleep. Pikachu stirred beneath the wide branches of the great tree. Its fur shimmered faintly, the moisture clinging to it reflecting thin slivers of light. The first warmth of the sun was tender, not yet bold enough to scatter the mist that floated above the earth like breath. For a moment, the world seemed divided, not between day and night, but between dream and waking. The forest was transformed. Every surface mirrored something else. The leaves above reflected the faint glow of the sky. The puddles below captured fragments of the canopy. The air shimmered with droplets that bent the light into soft halos. It was as though the forest had become a room of infinite mirrors, each one holding a reflection not of what was seen, but of what was felt. Pikachu rose slowly. Its paws made no sound against the damp ground. The reflections trembled slightly where it passed, ripples of light moving through them like the afterglow of a thought. The river that had guided it the night before was still near. It had calmed during the dark hours, its surface now smooth and glass-like. When Pikachu reached its edge and peered down, it saw itself reflected there, not as a fixed image, but as one caught between movement and stillness. The ripples distorted its outline into soft patterns, turning fur into waves, form into fluid. For a while, Pikachu simply watched. The reflections seemed alive, breathing in sync with the wind and water. Its shape would vanish, then reform, the boundaries between body and world fading into one continuous motion. It realized, slowly, that it was not only looking at itself, it was looking at everything that made it what it was. The sky, the trees, the light, the shadow, all gathered together upon that surface. A small current stirred the water, and the reflection split into two. For a heartbeat, Pikachu saw both versions of itself, one bright with the gold of the rising sun, the other cool with the blue of the river's depth. Neither was more real than the other. They existed in balance, two expressions of the same being. The air carried the faint murmur of the forest waking. The first calls of Pidgey and Tailo echoed softly through the branches, their voices blending with the slow rustle of leaves. The sound was gentle, layered, unhurried. Pikachu listened and felt no need to move. The morning unfolded at its own pace, indifferent to the rush of time. A drop of dew fell from the branch above, landing precisely on Pikachu's nose. It lingered there for a moment before sliding down, catching the light in a small prism that glowed like a shard of lightning trapped in water. Pikachu blinked, and the droplet fell to the ground, shattering into the soil without a sound. The world continued as though nothing had happened, yet the moment carried a strange fullness, a reminder of the beauty that lived in things so small they barely existed between one breath and the next. As the mist began to lift, shafts of sunlight pierced through the canopy. Each beam illuminated the drifting moisture, creating corridors of golden light that looked almost solid. Dust and dew danced within them like stars suspended in motion. Pikachu stepped into one of those beams, and for a brief instant, it was enveloped entirely in radiance. Its fur caught the light in delicate bursts of gold and silver, each hairline illuminated by the pulse of its own internal charge. The spark within it, the same quiet hum that had accompanied it through forest, meadow, and bridge, stirred softly. It was not the restless crackle of battle or fear. It was a living rhythm, calm and certain. Pikachu felt the current move through its small frame, out into the world, merging with the air and sunlight. It could almost feel the forest breathe it in. This was reflection too, not of form, but of essence. The world mirrored Pikachu, as much as Pikachu mirrored the world. The river, the wind, the trees, they all carried something of its presence now, just as they had always carried the echoes of those who came before. Pikachu thought of the meadow of forgotten voices, of the soft hum of memory that lived within the earth. It thought of the bridge between day and night, where two lights met without erasing one another. Now, in the quiet brilliance of morning, it understood that reflection was not repetition. It was connection. To be reflected was to be recognized by the world, to see one's light carried outward, multiplied across the infinite surfaces of existence. And to recognize oneself in return was to understand that every shimmer, every ripple, every spark was part of the same whole. Pikachu continued walking along the edge of the river. The reflection followed faithfully beside it. Not identical, but harmonious. Sometimes the wind would distort the water's surface, breaking the image into fragments. But even then, Pikachu saw that each fragment still held light. It began to notice other things reflected too. The wings of Butterfree fluttering above the reeds. The slow, rippling shadow of Magikarp gliding beneath the surface. The faint outline of a Farfetch'd perched on a stone, its image mirrored perfectly below. Each reflection moved differently, yet all were part of the same tapestry. Different expressions of life, sharing one rhythm of existence. The sun climbed higher. The mist dissolved fully now, and the reflections grew sharper, more defined. But with that clarity came fragility. The more vivid they became, the easier they were to disturb. Even a small ripple could fracture them into formless light. It was as though the world whispered a quiet truth. Perfection was beautiful, but it did not last. Stillness and motion were forever intertwined. Pikachu paused again and looked down once more at its own reflection. It was smiling, not the smile of joy or amusement, but of acceptance. There was no confusion now, no uncertainty about what it was meant to be. Evolution, transformation, growth. These were not obligations. They were possibilities. The choice to remain as it was did not make it less. It made it whole. In the gentle water, its mirrored self seemed to nod in agreement before vanishing as the current moved. The reflection was gone, but its meaning remained. A warm breeze drifted through the forest, stirring the branches overhead. The sound was deep and hushed, like distant thunder softened into comfort. Pikachu turned its gaze upward, watching the light shimmer through the moving leaves. Each flicker was a new reflection, a dance of brightness that reminded it that everything, even light, was always becoming something else. It began walking again, this time not toward or away, but simply within. There was no destination, no sense of pursuit. The path wound forward naturally, the forest shaping itself gently around each step. By the time Pikachu reached the heart of the grove, the sunlight had grown steady, warm, and golden. The reflections were fading from the river's surface, replaced by the steady gleam of day. The forest had awakened fully, but it retained the calm of dawn within its rhythm. Here, surrounded by light and the faint hum of the world, Pikachu felt an equilibrium so complete it could only be described as silence without absence. The reflection had served its purpose, not to show what Pikachu was, but to reveal what it already knew. That identity was not a decision made once, but a continuity carried across every moment. The light moved gently through the trees, settling upon the water like a sigh. Pikachu's shadow stretched long beside it, merging eventually with that of the forest. Above, the sun rose higher, and all reflections dissolved into one bright, seamless world. The forest began to thin as the ground grew steeper, and the air, once soft and damp with dew, turned cool and dry. Trees gave way to open slopes where rocks jutted out like the bones of the earth. The river, faithful and winding, curved away toward the lowlands until it became no more than a distant glimmer of light. Ahead rose the mountain, vast, silent, its summit veiled in pale mist. Pikachu stood at its base for a long moment. The slope stretched upward in endless folds, the kind of climb that invited patience rather than haste. Every breath carried the faint taste of stone and wind. The path was not clear, but it did not need to be. The mountain itself was the path. As Pikachu began its ascent, the rhythm of its movement slowed to match the rhythm of the world around it. The sound of its small paws pressing against gravel became part of a larger pattern. The rustle of wind through dry grass, the whisper of loose pebbles sliding down behind it, the quiet pulse of distant air, currents shifting across the peaks. The world grew quieter the higher it went. It was not an emptiness of sound, but a gathering of stillness. Even the birds that had sung in the forest seemed to have fallen silent here, their songs replaced by the low hum of altitude. The air thinned, and every step felt deliberate, carrying the weight of purpose and the lightness of surrender in equal measure. Halfway up, the path narrowed into a ridge, its edges dropping into valleys filled with silver fog. From here, Pikachu could see the entire expanse of the land below. The river winding like a soft thread, the meadows stretching in waves of muted green, the forest canopy spread wide and endless. Everything it had passed through was visible, small and quiet beneath the embrace of distance. The sight brought no pride, only calm. To look upon where one has been is to realize how everything connects, how every place once vast becomes a single note within the larger song. The wind began to rise. It moved in long, sweeping gusts that carried with them faint traces of sound, not words, not voices, but something more abstract, echoes. The mountain was alive with them. Each gust seemed to awaken the stone itself, drawing forth low vibrations that rolled through the rock and air alike. At first, they were indistinct, like murmurs half remembered from a dream. But as Pikachu climbed higher, they began to form patterns. The echoes were not random. They were reflections of sound. Everything that had ever touched this mountain was still here, carried forward by the wind and stone. Pikachu stopped and listened. The echoes were subtle but clear now, rising and falling in long, rhythmic waves. There were tones that resembled thunder long past, the soft tremor of ancient rain, the faint hum of electric energy from storms that had brushed these peaks centuries before. It realized that the mountain did not merely repeat sound, it transformed it. Each echo returned, changed, deepened, softened by distance, shaped by time. Every cry that had ever reached these slopes still existed, not as a memory, but as resonance. Pikachu began walking again, and with each step, the sound of its movement was caught by the wind and carried upward. The mountain accepted every noise, a crunch of gravel, a faint exhale, even the subtle vibration of energy within its body, and released it back in softer form. Each sound came home to it again, different but recognizable, as though the world was gently reminding it, nothing is lost. Everything becomes part of something larger. The higher Pikachu climbed, the stronger the echoes became. They began to take shape in layers, some high and bright, others deep and slow. They overlapped without clashing, forming a harmony that filled the air like the breath of the world itself. The sound was immense, yet intimate, vibrating through bone and fur. At the next plateau, the wind slowed again. Here, the path leveled out briefly, forming a flat shelf of stone overlooking the vastness below. Pikachu stepped forward until it stood at the edge. The valley beneath was blanketed in slow-moving mist, glowing faintly with the reflection of sunlight filtering through. When the wind shifted, the mist parted, and for a brief moment, Pikachu could see the meadow, the river, the bridge, the forest, all of it. Each place seemed distant, but the echoes that rose from the mountain carried their sounds upward, blurring the lines between near and far. The wind brought them all together. The hum of the meadow, the whisper of the bridge's stones, the murmur of the river, the rustle of the forest. The mountain was not separate from them. It was their voice returned, amplified by height and silence. Pikachu closed its eyes. The air vibrated softly through it, passing in waves that pulsed with the quiet rhythm of breath. Every echo was a reflection of life, the resonance of existence continuing beyond its moment. A faint spark rose from Pikachu's fur, drawn out by the air's dry charge. It danced upward, caught in the wind, and vanished into the brightness above. But its echo remained. The faintest hum returned a second later, lower, slower, as though the mountain itself had accepted that spark and given it new form. The realization came wordlessly. Everything that leaves returns, changed, but not diminished. The mountain did not hold sound to keep it. It held sound to transform it, to let it become something new. The echoes were not reminders, they were continuations. Far above, the summit gleamed faintly in sunlight. The mist curled around it, moving like breath, never still, never trapped. Pikachu continued climbing, each step lighter than the one before. The echoes no longer felt external. They were part of the rhythm that moved through it. Eventually, the slope flattened once more. The top was not sharp or grand, but broad and soft, its stones smoothed by centuries of wind. Here the air was almost still, broken only by 5. The faint vibration that seemed to come from within the rock itself. Pikachu stood upon the summit and looked out. From this height, the world was whole. There were no boundaries between land and sky, between the seen and unseen. The wind moved through everything, carrying songs of places beyond sight. Even the sunlight had a tone now, a hum that trembled faintly at the edge of hearing. Pikachu sat. It let the echoes move through it. The air was filled with sound, yet it felt silent. Every note was balanced by another, every rise by a fall, every spark by a stillness. The mountain breathed, and Pikachu breathed with it. The charge within its small frame was calm, steady. It hummed in resonance with the echoes around it. No surge, no release, only equilibrium. And in that stillness, Pikachu understood that identity was not a single sound, nor a single echo. It was the entire harmony, every tone it had ever been, every reflection, every silence between. The world did not ask it to change. It only asked it to listen. And in listening, Pikachu found that it already belonged. The wind rose one final time, sweeping gently across the summit, carrying the echoes outward. The sound faded into the distance, blending with the horizon until it was no longer possible to tell where the mountain ended and the sky began. Pikachu stood and turned its gaze toward the endless blue. The journey upward had been a return all along, not to a place, but to understanding. The echoes followed it as it began its descent, soft and warm, whispering through the air like the gentle pulse of memory. The air changed long before the first cloud appeared. A stillness came first, a deep, resonant quiet that settled over the mountain like the pause between heartbeats. The world seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Even the echoes, once ceaseless in their whispering, faded into the stone, as if the mountain itself was listening. Pikachu stood upon the high ridge, its small form framed against the vastness of the open sky. The sunlight that had once bathed the peaks was dimming, not suddenly, but steadily, as though an invisible hand was drawing a curtain across the heavens. The horizon darkened, painted in slow-moving shades of gray and indigo. The wind began to stir. It came not as a gust, but as a low pulse of air, rhythmic, and immense. The grasses that clung to the rocks bent slightly under its pressure, their motion uniform and patient. The scent of rain drifted faintly on the breeze, a cool metallic sharpness that spoke of distance closing in. Above, the clouds gathered. They rolled together in silence, layer upon layer, thickening until the sky became a living sea of motion. No single shape held for long. Every form was consumed by the next. The light shifted as the clouds moved, creating flickers of brightness within shadow. Shadow within light. Pikachu watched without fear. Storms were not strangers to it. Lightning had always been its element, its nature. But this was not the electric excitement of battle, or the raw power of unleashed energy. This was the storm as it existed in truth, not rage but balance, not destruction but renewal. The wind grew stronger. It pressed against Pikachu's fur, flattening it momentarily before letting it rise again. The hum of charge within its body awakened in response, not from alarm, but from recognition. The same force that moved through the clouds above flowed within it now, a current of shared existence. A low rumble spread across the sky. It began deep and distant, like the growl of the earth itself, then expanded outward until it filled every space between heaven and stone. The sound did not break the silence. It deepened it, made it vast. The mountain vibrated with it, every pebble trembling softly in harmony. Then came the first flash. It was not a line, but a bloom, a sphere of white light that expanded within the clouds, so bright it turned the gray sky into pure day for an instant. Pikachu's body responded instinctively, the energy within aligning perfectly with the pattern of the strike. There was no resistance, only resonance. When the thunder followed, it was immense, but not violent. The sound rolled through the mountain and over Pikachu like a wave, echoing and softening as it moved. The world was one continuous vibration, and Pikachu stood at its center. Raindrops began to fall, scattered and deliberate. Each one struck the stone with a small, distinct sound. The air cooled rapidly, the moisture gathering in the wind until the scent of rain became all-encompassing. The storm had arrived fully now, its rhythm established. The clouds above flickered constantly, veins of lightning weaving through them like luminous rivers. Each flash revealed new contours in the sky, swirls, folds, unseen depths. The light illuminated the mist in the valleys below, turning it silver, then leaving it dark again. Pikachu's fur shimmered faintly with residual charge. The electricity was not violent. It was calm, alive, a quiet reflection of the sky's own pulse. Each breath it took matched the rise and fall of thunder. Each blink of light above had an echo within. There was no separation anymore. The storm was not something to endure or resist. It was an extension of the same harmony that had existed in the forest, in the river, in the mountain's echoes. This was simply another voice in the song of the world, the voice of power held in stillness. The rain thickened, falling in long slanted lines. It struck the rock and ran down in small streams that merged and split across the surface. The sound was endless, soft in some places, sharp in others. But together it became a kind of music, a pattern of random precision. Pikachu closed its eyes. The lightning continued to pulse overhead, each flash illuminating the inside of its eyelids in bursts of white and gold. The hum within it deepened until it could no longer tell where its own energy ended and the storms began. It felt no need to release its power. For the first time, it understood that to contain energy could also be an act of harmony. To exist with it, not against it, was a form of balance beyond expression. The storm was not asking for action. It was offering communion. The thunder rolled again, longer this time, stretching across the sky in waves. The mountain's surface amplified it, returning a dozen softened echoes that faded one after another until only silence remained. Between each rumble, the rain's rhythm became more distinct, each drop a tiny percussion in the greater orchestra. In that sound, Pikachu felt something ancient, not memory exactly, but continuity, the recognition that storms had always been and would always be. Every flash of lightning born from the sky was kin to the spark that lived in its small heart. The same current that split the heavens also gave life to its every breath. It lifted its head and opened its eyes. Above, the lightning streaked through the clouds again, this time closer, more defined. For an instant, the entire landscape was illuminated. The ridges, the valleys, the paths it had taken, and the mist rising from below. The light revealed everything as one, every feature bound by the same line of brilliance. When the flash faded, darkness returned softer, more complete. The world exhaled. The rain slowed. The thunder moved farther away, rolling into distance like a song's final note. The storm did not vanish suddenly. It dissolved, the way sleep dissolves into waking. The clouds began to open in slow spirals, revealing small patches of lighter sky. The wind softened, its edges rounded by calm. The air that followed was cool, washed clean. Steam rose faintly from the wet stone, curling upward in thin ribbons that glowed in the muted light. Pikachu's fur was damp, clinging close to its small frame, but the energy inside remained steady and warm. A single spark flickered at the tip of its tail before fading. The world was new again. The storm had not broken anything. It had realigned it. The air, the light, the ground, even Pikachu's heartbeat, all pulsed in quiet synchrony. Far off, another rumble echoed, distant, faint, but comforting. The mountain absorbed it, letting the sound roll through its body. Pikachu listened until the last vibration faded into stillness. It understood then that even the greatest forces of nature did not stand apart from peace. They were peace, expressed in movement too vast to comprehend. Power and calm were not opposites. They were two notes of the same, eternal harmony. The sky brightened gradually. The remaining clouds thinned, their undersides lit by a pale, forgiving sun. The rain stopped completely, leaving droplets clinging to the stone like jewels. Each reflected the new light in miniature, turning the mountaintop into a field of scattered stars. Pikachu stood in the center of it all, breathing, slowly, deeply. It had faced the storm, not by meeting it with strength, but with stillness. And in doing so, it had seen itself reflected again, not in mirrors or rivers, but in thunder and lightning, in sky and earth. There was nothing to overcome. There never had been. As the wind calmed, the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was fullness, an awareness so complete it needed no sound at all. Pikachu turned its gaze once more toward the horizon, where faint traces of blue began to re-emerge through the thinning clouds. The storm had passed, but its rhythm remained. And within that rhythm, Pikachu's pulse continued, gentle, steady, eternal. The descent from the mountain came quietly. The stones that had once rung with thunder now rested under a sky cleansed by rain. Mist clung to the peaks, wrapping them in soft white folds that moved with slow intention. Each step Pikachu took left faint marks in the damp earth before the wind erased them. The world was hushed, not silent in emptiness, but full of a presence that did not speak. The storm had taken the noise of the air with it, and what remained was something vast and motionless. Even the small rivers that wound through the foothills flowed with a subdued rhythm, their surfaces smooth as molten glass. The valley opened below. It was immense, an expanse of muted color stretching farther than sight allowed. The grasses shimmered faintly in the returning light, every blade holding a single bead of rain. Pools of water dotted the plain, reflecting fragments of the sky. The horizon curved gently, its line blurred by distance and haze. Pikachu paused at the edge of the slope, watching the valley breathe. The air moved barely at all, as though suspended in thought. Even the usual whisper of leaves against one another was absent. Every sound, every motion, existed at half its usual speed, drawn into the rhythm of stillness that filled the land. As it began its descent, the ground softened beneath its feet. The path gave way to soil and small plants that released faint scents when brushed. Each step created a tiny sound, a subtle press of dampness, a shift in weight, and each one faded before the next began. When Pikachu reached the valley floor, the silence became total. The world seemed to fold around it, the vast open space drawing inward, until even its breathing sounded too loud. There was no wind. Not a single leaf stirred. The clouds above did not move. This was the Valley of Still Air. It was said that long ago a storm had passed here and found itself unable to continue. The mountains around it had drawn in its breath and held it forever, leaving behind this quiet, a space untouched by motion. Pikachu walked slowly across the grass. Each movement felt amplified, not by sound, but by awareness. The ground responded softly beneath its steps. The air carried no temperature. It was neither cool nor warm, only present. Even the light seemed subdued, diffused into an even glow that came from everywhere at once. In this stillness, time itself felt altered. Moments stretched, until they lost their edges. The sun, though visible behind the thinning clouds, did not appear to move. The shadows stayed where they were, patient and unchanging. Pikachu's own heartbeats came slower, deeper, matching the rhythm of this place without effort. There was no sense of loneliness here. The absence of sound was not isolation, it was unity. Every stone, every blade of grass, every ripple in the shallow pools shared the same silence. The world was not withholding, it was waiting, balanced perfectly between breath and release. Pikachu came to one of the pools. Its surface was unbroken, so perfectly still that the reflection within seemed not like an image, but another world. The clouds above were mirrored exactly, their edges as soft as the real ones in the sky. Pikachu looked down, and its own reflection stared back, not as something separate, but as part of the whole. For a long while, it simply stood there. The reflection did not waver. Even the faint sparks at the tips of its fur did not disturb the water's calm. Then, gently, it reached out a paw and touched the surface. The ripples expanded outward in slow circles, each one traveling farther but growing softer as it went. They crossed the pool, touched the edges, and returned faintly inward, overlapping until the surface became a web of light and shadow. Within seconds, the ripples faded, and the stillness returned completely, as if the motion had never been. The act felt sacred somehow, a reminder that even disturbance could be temporary, and peace could reassert itself without effort. The water did not resist. It did not resent the touch. It simply absorbed it, transformed it, and returned to equilibrium. Pikachu walked on. The valley stretched endlessly ahead, but every part of it seemed the same, motionless, reflective, and infinite. The deeper it went, the more it felt the boundary between itself and the world dissolve. There was no need for thought here, no tension of choice or path. The valley did not require direction. It only required presence. A faint hum began to grow, not from the air, but from within. It was not the charged current of electricity or the restless spark of power. It was subtler, like the echo of energy existing without intent. It felt ancient, soft, familiar. The hum spread through Pikachu's body, aligning it once more with everything around. There was understanding in that vibration, an unspoken truth. Stillness was not the absence of energy. It was energy at rest, perfectly balanced, needing no movement to prove its existence. The realization deepened, sinking into its chest like warmth spreading outward. Pikachu closed its eyes and listened to the silence until it became indistinguishable from sound. In that quiet, memories returned, not as images, but as sensations. The forest, the rain, the mountain, the storm, all parts of the same continuum. The stillness here was not separate from the storm above. It was the same force in another form. Where lightning had been the movement of balance, this was its pause. The world spoke both languages fluently. Pikachu was learning to listen to both. After a time, minutes, hours, perhaps longer, it opened its eyes again. The sun had shifted slightly, or maybe the light itself had changed in tone. The valley seemed brighter now, though no new color had entered it. The air was still the same, motionless, calm, but something unseen had moved. A single petal drifted across the valley. It came from somewhere far away, carried on an invisible current that did not seem to exist until this moment. The petal's slow descent through the air created the faintest shimmer, like light bending. It landed near Pikachu's paw and rested there without sound. Even the smallest motion could become a miracle in stillness. Pikachu watched it until the petal settled fully. Then it breathed, and that breath was enough to move the air again. The tiniest ripple passed across the valley, not wind, but awareness awakening. The grasses responded with a faint sway. The pools shivered at their edges. The world exhaled. The valley was no longer entirely still. It had accepted motion again, not as disruption, but as renewal. Balance had shifted, and in that shift, peace remained intact. Pikachu looked toward the far edge of the plain. There, the land began to rise again, forming a distant path that led toward a forest faintly visible through the haze. It was time to move. The stillness had given what it needed to give. To linger now would be to hold what was meant to flow. It began walking, slow and measured. Each step stirred the air slightly more. The hum within faded to a gentle rhythm, merging once again with heartbeat and breath. Behind it, the valley resumed its quiet, untroubled by departure. As Pikachu reached the rise at the far edge, it turned once more. The valley stretched endlessly behind, a mirror of calm, glowing faintly under the sun's returning warmth. It would remain there always, timeless and unchanged, waiting for silence to find it again. Pikachu continued upward. The air grew lighter, touched by wind once more. The sound of leaves returned, faint at first, then clearer as it climbed. The world was waking again, shifting from stillness to motion, from reflection to continuation. At the crest of the hill, it paused. The valley lay behind, the forest ahead. Between them, Pikachu stood balanced, the meeting point of movement and rest, silence and sound. The balance it had found in the storm and rediscovered, in stillness, was now part of its every breath. The wind rose softly, threading through the grass and along its fur. It did not resist. It simply let the current move through it, as the valley had done with its touch. Everything was connected. The silence and the sound, the motion and the calm, the spark and the still air. And in that understanding, Pikachu walked forward again, into the gentle rustle of the forest, carrying with it the memory of the valley that had taught it, the language of peace without motion. The forest waited at the valley's edge, its trees rising like sentinels in soft formation. The canopy above formed a seamless ceiling of muted greens and golds, light filtering through in thin, trembling strands. The air was cooler here, the scent of damp bark and old leaves heavy and grounding. As Pikachu stepped past the first line of trees, the sounds of the open plain faded. Instantly, the forest swallowed everything but its own breath. It was not silent like the valley had been. Rather, it held a living quiet, one made of movement so subtle it almost disappeared into itself. The wind did not blow here. It drifted. It moved through the branches not as force, but as thought, a slow exchange between the leaves and the air. Each motion carried weight, as though every shift of light and rustle of moss had purpose. The forest floor was soft and uneven. Fallen needles mixed with earth to create a surface that gave slightly beneath Pikachu's paws. Every step produced a muffled impression, barely audible even to its own ears. The air was full of scents, sweet rot, wet stone, faint flowers unseen but nearby. As Pikachu walked deeper, the light changed tone. The green of the leaves absorbed the sun and returned it as something gentler, as though the world here existed under a permanent dusk. Shafts of light moved slowly across the trunks, golden and deliberate. Dust motes hung suspended, unmoving, until disturbed by the quiet rhythm of breath. This forest did not speak in words. Its language was older. It communicated through patience, the bending of a bough, the fall of a leaf, the way a root split stone without sound. Pikachu could feel it, not as a message to be decoded, but as a resonance it could tune itself to. The deeper it walked, the more it sensed that everything here was connected through invisible threads of intention. Somewhere far above, a flock of small birds moved between branches. Their motion was nearly soundless, wings catching faint air, currents that did not reach the ground. Only a few loose feathers drifted down, spinning slowly through beams of light. When one landed near Pikachu, it trembled once, then lay still, absorbed by the quiet. The air here seemed aware. Every exhale Pikachu released was returned to it as cool air drawn in, as if the forest itself was breathing in time with its visitor. The rhythm was natural, effortless. The deeper it went, the slower its own movements became, until walking felt less like an act of will and more like participation in an ancient ritual. The path wound gently between massive roots, some as tall as Pikachu itself. They rose from the earth in slow arcs before diving back into the soil, forming arches and patterns that looked intentional, but were born of time alone. Moss grew thick on their surfaces, shimmering faintly with moisture, each drop catching what little light could reach. A low hum filled the air. Not sound, exactly, more the perception of vibration. It was steady, soothing, like a melody that could only be felt. Pikachu stopped, closed its eyes, and listened through its skin. The sensation came from everywhere at once: the ground, the trees, the air between them. The hum was memory, held in matter. Every tree here had lived through storms, droughts, and countless seasons. The energy of all those moments lingered inside them, preserved in silence. This was the forest's whispering, the echo of what had been, carried not in words, but in the texture of the living world. Pikachu touched one of the trunks gently. The bark was rough, but beneath it, there was warmth. The hum deepened for an instant at the contact, as if the forest acknowledged the touch. It was not communication in the human sense. It was alignment. The two energies met, recognized each other, and continued together without disruption. Memories came faintly then, not its own, but impressions. The flash of a storm long gone, lightning striking through these very branches, the rush of wind through leaves centuries ago, rain washing through roots deep underground. The forest had witnessed it all, and it carried those moments with quiet grace. This was what the valley had prepared it for: to hear without sound, to understand without thought. The whispers were not calls for action. They were reminders that life continued, softly, in ways unseen. As it walked, Pikachu began to notice small patterns. Tiny mushrooms arranged in spirals at the base of trees, lines of fallen leaves forming paths that seemed to guide without command. Even the light itself seemed to bend in ways that suggested design. The forest did not impose direction. It offered suggestion. It followed the light. Wherever a patch of brightness fell, Pikachu walked through it. The light moved, slowly, but constantly, as clouds above shifted. Each time it crossed into a new beam, the hum of the forest deepened slightly, like an unseen chord growing richer. Eventually, the path opened into a dod clearing. The trees stood wider apart here, and the ground was covered in soft moss that glowed faintly with captured light. In the center stood a single ancient tree, far larger than any surrounding it. Its trunk was massive, its surface furrowed and worn smooth where countless seasons had brushed against it. Pikachu approached with quiet steps. The air around the tree was different, denser, charged not with electricity but with age. The hum that had filled the forest was strongest here, concentrated into something that vibrated deep in the chest. The energy was not loud or imposing. It was the presence of continuity itself. At the base of the great tree, roots coiled outward like rivers of wood. Between them, water pooled, clear and unmoving. Pikachu looked into it and saw its reflection once more. But this time, it was layered. Beneath its image were faint shadows of others. Echoes of creatures, long before. Perhaps those who had come seeking the same stillness. The tree's canopy moved faintly, though there was no wind. The leaves trembled, and light cascaded down in narrow streams, catching the water below and turning it silver. The reflections danced softly, a language of pattern and motion. Standing before the ancient tree, Pikachu felt its own current rise again, not sharply, but as a slow tide. The sparks along its cheeks glowed faintly in rhythm with the flicker of light above. The energy inside it aligned with that of the forest, creating a harmony that needed no sound to be heard. It realized then that this was what the forest whispered. That identity, like the trees themselves, did not need to shout to exist. Growth required neither noise nor change in form. The forest had been many things over time. Seed, sapling, towering giant, and yet its essence had never altered. Pikachu felt this truth echo through its small body. Evolution was not the only path to becoming. Being could deepen without transformation. Existence itself could be enough. The hum slowly softened, fading into the background again, as though the forest, satisfied with what it had conveyed, returned to its steady silence. The air grew lighter, the beams of sunlight warmer. A faint breeze passed through at last, the first real movement in hours. Leaves drifted downward in lazy spirals. One brushed against Pikachu's ear before settling on the moss. The sound it made was almost nothing, but in the stillness, it was profound. Pikachu breathed deeply. The scent of the forest filled its lungs. Earth, age, and renewal. It turned from the ancient tree and looked back along the path it had come. The shadows now moved differently. Where before they had concealed, now they seemed to guide. It walked slowly toward the far end of the clearing, where the forest began to thin again. The hum remained faintly present, a constant reminder of the connection that would not fade. Every living thing carried the same quiet memory, the same steady pulse. At the forest's edge, the Surm, trees parted to reveal a landscape of soft hills and a distant line of mist-covered lakes. The air beyond shimmered with sunlight. The forest behind Pikachu exhaled once, as though in farewell, the leaves sighing softly together. Pikachu paused before stepping out. It turned back for a final moment and felt gratitude, not as a thought, but as a warmth expanding from within. The forest did not answer. It did not need to. The whispering had done its work. Then Pikachu stepped forward, leaving the shade behind. The light met it fully, bright and unbroken. The air moved freely again, but the calm it carried within remained undisturbed. The whisper of the forest continued, not in sound, but in memory. Quiet, eternal, and alive. The path led downward, winding between low, grassy slopes that caught the last of the afternoon light. The forest behind Pikachu had grown faint, its deep hum replaced by open silence. Ahead, the air shimmered faintly with moisture, and the scent of still water filled the breeze before the lake itself appeared. It stretched far wider than it first seemed, a perfect oval of silver blue framed by reeds and low stones. The surface was completely smooth, untouched by wind. Even the smallest ripple was absent, as though the world had chosen to stop for this one moment of reflection. The lake mirrored the sky with impossible clarity. Clouds drifted above and below, equal in form, equal in movement. The line between water and air disappeared, leaving only an endless expanse of light and shadow. Pikachu approached slowly, the grass whispering beneath its paws. The closer it came, the more it saw within the water. Its reflection appeared, not distorted, but precise. Every line of fur, every faint spark of static, rendered perfectly in the mirrored surface. It looked less like an image, and more like another being, waiting patiently below the boundary of the world. For a while, Pikachu simply stood there, breathing softly. The water gave nothing away. It did not ripple at its presence or react to its movement. The reflection met its gaze with calm neutrality, an equal and unchanging twin. Then, faintly, memories began to rise, unbidden, slow, and clear. The weight of a stone in the forest near Professor Oak's lab, the gleam of the thunderstone held in careful human hands, the expectation in every face watching, the quiet defiance when Pikachu had turned away. It had been a single act of refusal. A moment when the current had split, and the world had waited for its choice. To evolve would have been to grow, they had said. To remain was to stay behind. But even then, without words, Pikachu had understood something deeper. That evolution could not be forced from outside. Change must come from within. When stillness turned naturally into motion, anything else was noise. The reflection before it shifted faintly, though nothing above had moved. The image of itself flickered once, then steadied again. The small spark along its cheek brightened, and the spark below followed perfectly, like synchronized pulse and echo. Pikachu leaned closer. The water remained undisturbed. It could see everything in that reflection. The same round form, the same eyes that held light without aggression. But there was something more now, a depth that had not been there before. This was not the reflection of a creature unsure of its path. This was the image of one who had learned stillness, who had faced storm and silence alike, and had come to understand them as parts of the same existence. It realized then that what it saw below was not what the world saw when it refused to evolve. The world had seen resistance, stubbornness, fear of growth. But this reflection showed what it truly had been all along. Alignment with the current that was right for it. Not lesser, not incomplete, simply true. The lake remained still, but now Pikachu sensed motion beneath the surface. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Small bubbles rose and vanished without sound. The faintest vibration passed through the ground under its paws. The water was alive in its stillness, as the valley had been. The reflection seemed to breathe, not literally, but rhythmically. Each exhale of Pikachu matched by a pulse of light within the water. The connection deepened until the line between being and image thinned to near transparency. For a brief, infinite moment, Pikachu could feel both worlds, the one above and the one below. The solid air pressing against its fur and the cool, liquid calm mirroring every thought. In that dual awareness came understanding that self and reflection were not separate. What it had always sought outside, the sense of wholeness, of evolution, had always existed within. The ripples came then, slow and deliberate, not from wind or falling leaves, but from within the lake itself. Circles expanded outward from the reflection's chest, moving gently across the surface. Each ripple caught the light differently, breaking the illusion of perfect symmetry. And yet, even as the image wavered, it did not disappear. The distortion did not erase identity. It revealed it. The still water had been a mirror. The moving water became truth. Pikachu stepped forward until its paws touched the edge. The cool sensation of water met the fur, delicate and immediate. The contact sent faint waves outward, joining those already spreading from the lake's center. The reflection bent, reshaped, and folded into itself. But the spark of light remained constant, even through the movement. The water had ceased to reflect exactly, and yet Pikachu knew its image was still there, unseen but real. The loss of clarity was not loss at all. It was proof of existence continuing, beyond appearance. The air shifted. A small wind rose, just enough to move the grass and send a line of ripples across the lake. The reflection vanished completely for a moment, replaced by shimmering patterns of sunlight. The moment held no sadness. Pikachu watched as the broken surface glittered and reformed, each wave carrying fragments of sky. The world was never still forever. Even mirrors must move to stay alive. It stepped back, letting the water rest again. The reflection returned slowly, fragmented at first, then whole once more. But now it appeared lighter, less bound to form. Pikachu's image seemed to float above the surface rather than within it. The eyes of the reflection shone with quiet comprehension. Pikachu sat by the water's edge. Time, lost, meaning. The surface shifted between mirror and motion, reflection and refraction. Sometimes it could see itself clearly. Other times, it disappeared entirely into the patterns of light. It understood that this too was part of the truth. That selfhood was not constant, but fluid like the world around it. Overhead, clouds gathered again, not thick or stormy, but soft and layered. They drifted slowly across the lake, turning its surface from silver to gray to pale gold. The reflection changed with them, but always remained. The longer Pikachu watched, the calmer it became. Each ripple, each subtle movement, echoed the patterns of thought within. The refusal to evolve had never been defiance. It had been instinct, a knowing that its path was already complete, in a way evolution could not enhance. Growth did not mean becoming something else. Sometimes it meant returning to what one already was, more fully. A single drop of water fell from a leaf above, landing near Pikachu's paw. The concentric circles that spread outward merged with the lake's own ripples, indistinguishable after a moment. Everything merged eventually. As the wind quieted, the surface smoothed again. The reflection was clear, but different, softer, lighter, at peace. The spark on Pikachu's cheek flickered once more, but this time the light lingered in the air, a faint afterglow that seemed to hang between water and sky. Pikachu rose. The day was waning. The light stretched long across the lake, painting it with warmth that would soon give way to evening blue. The forest behind whispered faintly, leaves brushing against one another like words of farewell. It turned from the water and began to walk along the shore. Each step was quiet, each breath even. The lake's reflection followed in rhythm, always there, but no longer commanding its gaze. It no longer needed to look to see itself. Farther down, the shoreline curved, leading toward a narrow stream that flowed gently out of the lake. The sound of trickling water joined the air, soft and musical. Pikachu followed it, feeling the rhythm of its movement match the calm pulse within. The stream led toward an open meadow where the sky stretched wide again. The foreman wind was gentle, carrying the faint scent of flowers. Behind it, the lake glowed in the distance, a fragment of sky resting upon earth. Pikachu looked back. One last time. The surface shimmered under the fading light, holding both the image of what had been and what was yet to come. Then it turned forward once more and walked into the deepening evening, carrying the reflection within it now. Unchanging. Quiet. Whole. The evening descended slowly, with the grace of falling petals. The air thickened with the scent of earth and cool water, and the golden light of the day softened into a dim, silvery hue. Pikachu followed the stream until the forest opened into a meadow of tall grass, bathed in the first whispers of twilight. The world around seemed to breathe differently here. The movements of the wind, the sigh of the leaves, even the gentle murmur of the stream carried a rhythm that spoke of rest. It was not silence, but the harmony of quiet things. Sound turned soft. Motion turned still. Pikachu stopped near a small rise, where the land curved gently upward. From there, the view reached far, over the rippling field and the last glimmers of the distant lake. The sun had fallen completely, leaving behind a faint orange glow at the edge of the horizon. Above, the first stars had begun to appear, timid and scattered, like sparks escaping the day's final breath. The sky seemed vast beyond measure. Without the sun's brightness, the layers of space unfolded endlessly, one tone of blue deepening into another until the edges of the world blurred. The more Pikachu looked upward, the more it felt that same stillness it had found by the lake, now mirrored above instead of below. It sat down on the soft grass, letting the quiet seep into its fur. The earth beneath held the warmth of the day, slowly fading, while the air carried the chill of the coming night. That balance, warmth below, coolness above, felt perfect, as if the world had found its center and was inviting Pikachu to rest within it. The stars multiplied with patient inevitability. One by one they emerged, small at first, then brighter, until the entire sky shimmered with distant fires. They were countless, and yet each felt deliberate, placed exactly where it was meant to be. Pikachu had seen this sky many times before, from forests, hills, and open plains, but tonight it seemed different. The stars appeared closer, not in distance, but in meaning. Each one carried a presence, a subtle pulse that resonated faintly with the rhythm of Pikachu's own heartbeat. They flickered not in isolation, but together, weaving a pattern too vast for eyes to see, yet somehow deeply understood. As the night deepened, a faint trail of light stretched across the sky, the Milky Way, glimmering like an ancient path of memory. It seemed to connect the farthest reaches of the heavens to the quiet meadow below. Pikachu's gaze followed its arc until it felt the pull of something familiar within it. Long ago, on another night much like this, it had lain beside Ash, watching the same stars. The air had been filled with laughter then, with the scent of campfire smoke and the soft rustle of nearby Pokémon. There had been no talk of evolution, no pressure of expectation, only the vast, open night and the bond that required no words. That memory rose gently now, not with longing, but with gratitude. The bond had never depended on change or form. It had existed because of recognition, one soul seeing another without demand. In that moment, Pikachu realized that what it had found in reflection at the lake was what Ash had always seen, a being complete as it was, whole without alteration. A soft wind passed through the meadow, bending the tall grass in a long, slow wave. The movement shimmered under the starlight, like a tide flowing across the land. Pikachu watched it ripple outward, the same rhythm it had felt in the lake's surface, the same pulse that moved through every living thing. The connection deepened. The wind's whisper became a voice without words, a chorus of existence breathing as one. The stars above, the grass below, the distant water, and the quiet spark within Pikachu all shared a single pulse. The separation between them dissolved, until there was only the movement of energy, rising, falling, flowing, returning, A faint shimmer began to surround Pikachu. Not visible light, but something softer, felt rather than seen. The air tingled gently, the way it does before a storm. But this was no storm. It was a hum of harmony, a vibration of perfect alignment between self and world. The electricity within Pikachu did not flash or crackle. It glowed quietly, suffusing its form like starlight caught within fur. The spark was no longer a weapon or tool. It was expression, the natural breath of energy that existed as part of being alive. Pikachu closed its eyes. The rhythm of its breathing matched the slow rotation of the stars overhead. Inhale, light expanding. Exhale, darkness deepening. The two existed together, as inseparable halves of the same cycle. The longer it sat there, the more the distinction between body and sky faded. The stars above seemed to draw closer still, until Pikachu could almost feel them brushing against its awareness. It imagined, not with thought but with knowing, that each of those distant lights was a reflection of something within, the endless sparks of potential that every being carried. Evolution, then, was not a single act, but a continuum. Some evolved in form, others in understanding. Pikachu's path had been the latter. Not the transformation of body, but the awakening of stillness. The grass whispered again. Somewhere far off, a hoot-hoot called, its rhythm slow and steady. The sound marked time without urgency, as if counting breaths rather than seconds. Pikachu listened, and for a long time there was nothing else. The moon rose gradually, pale and round. Its reflection appeared in Pikachu's eyes, twin orbs of calm light. The shadows stretched longer, the edges of the world softening, until all shapes seemed to melt into one another. It lay down, resting its head on the grass. The scent of the meadow filled its senses, earth, dew, faint traces of flowers hidden among the stalks. The ground felt alive, each blade of grass gently swaying with the pulse of the wind. The rhythm lulled it further into peace. Above, the stars shimmered brighter now. One shot across the sky, a fleeting line of light that faded as quickly as it appeared. Pikachu's eyes followed it, feeling no wish to capture or hold it. Beauty existed in its passing, meaning existed in its movement. It thought of the Thunderstone again, the one it had turned away from. It understood now that refusing it had never been denial. It had been alignment. The energy of its being did not crave change in form, but deepening in essence. To accept oneself fully was to evolve without changing shape. The spark along its cheeks glowed once more, faint but steady. The warmth spread through its body like the softest current, neither rising nor fading, simply existing. The night seemed infinite, but within that infinity, Pikachu sensed the smallest, most perfect stillness, a center point in which all motion found rest. The stars circled above, the wind flowed, the earth breathed, and Pikachu remained, neither separate nor dissolved, but complete. Time passed unnoticed. Hours slipped into one another without weight. The stars wheeled overhead, each movement part of an endless cycle that had repeated for ages beyond counting. Yet to Pikachu, this night felt unique, as if it were the culmination of every night before. At some unknown hour, the first light of dawn began to touch the far horizon. The darkness softened, shifting from deep indigo to pale blue. The stars faded one by one, retreating not in loss, but in fulfillment, like performers stepping back into silence after a perfect note. Pikachu stirred. The coolness of the night clung gently to its fur, and the earth beneath was moist with dew. It rose slowly, stretching, feeling the balance of fatigue and calm that follows deep rest. The spark of electricity remained quiet, a subtle hum beneath the skin. It did not need to flash. It did not need to prove itself. It simply existed, the silent echo of connection between being and world. The sun had not yet risen, but its presence could already be felt. An unseen glow waiting just beyond the horizon. Pikachu stood facing it, breathing in the air that carried both the memory of stars and the promise of day. It realized, then, that it had not merely watched the stars return, it had returned with them. The night had been a circle, bringing it back to itself, back to the place where acceptance was not a conclusion but a beginning. When the first ray of light finally broke across the meadow, Pikachu's shadow stretched long and golden across the grass. The stars vanished completely, yet their memory lingered in every glint of dew, every spark along its fur. The night had ended, but its stillness remained, within, unshakable, infinite. The morning began not with sound, but with color. The horizon bled softly into gold, faint at first, then deepening as the sun's edge rose from behind the far hills. The world emerged in gradients, blue melting into amber, amber into pale white. Each blade of grass caught the light, as though it had been dipped in molten glass. Pikachu stood in the middle of the meadow, still facing east. The faint warmth of the sun touched its fur, igniting tiny reflections along its back, where dew still clung. The night's coolness had not yet vanished. It lingered beneath the surface of the air, creating that rare balance between warmth and chill that only morning knows. The spark within Pikachu matched that balance, quiet, calm, perfectly aligned, no longer restless, no longer searching. The meadow stretched in every direction, an ocean of whispering green. Each movement of the wind sent ripples through it, echoing the slow, deliberate rhythm of the lake's surface from the day before. The world was breathing again, awake, renewed, familiar. Pikachu began to walk. The steps were unhurried. The earth felt soft beneath its paws, still damp with dew. With every step, small droplets clung to its fur and fell again, scattering tiny flashes of light. The ground sloped gently downward, leading toward a winding trail that cut through a cluster of trees at the far edge of the meadow. The first Pidgey called from a nearby branch, its voice fragile and high, quickly joined by another and then another, until the air filled with layered tones of life. Cricketa trilled faintly from the shadows, their rhythm weaving between the bird calls like the heartbeat of the forest itself. Every sound felt magnified, as though the stillness of the night had sharpened the world's edges. Even the faint rustle of grass seemed full of intention. The dawn was not just the return of light, it was the unveiling of every small miracle that daylight too easily hides. Pikachu paused near the edge of the trees. The forest here was thinner than the one it had passed through before. Light filtered through the branches in shifting beams, creating patterns that danced on the ground. The air smelled of pine and cool bark, the scent deep and grounding. It moved beneath the trees, following the narrow dirt path that wound through them. The world here was hushed again, but it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of presence, the kind that fills the air when everything is exactly where it should be. Each sound carried meaning: the crunch of leaves beneath its paws, the faint drip of water from branches, the low hum of unseen insects. Together they formed a kind of music that needed no melody. Through the shifting light, Pikachu noticed faint traces of others, small footprints, a feather caught on a twig, a berry half-eaten and left behind. Everything moved with purpose, yet without hurry. After a while, the path opened again into a clearing. At its center lay a fallen tree, old and smooth, its bark worn away by time and weather. Moss had claimed its surface, soft and vibrant, glowing faintly in the sunlight. Pikachu climbed onto it and sat. From this height, it could see far again, the meadow it had crossed, the lake beyond glinting faintly in the distance, and, further still, the faint silhouette of the mountains, where the clouds still touched the peaks. It felt no longing for any of those places. The journey had been enough. The meaning was not in the destinations, but in the quiet transitions between them, the forest's breath, the still lake, the open meadow, the night of stars. Each had been a mirror, showing different reflections of the same truth. The sun continued to rise, the light now full and strong, shadows shortened. The warmth spread through the forest, drying the dew from the leaves and sending faint wisps of mist upward into the air. The mist caught the sunlight and broke it into soft rainbows that drifted briefly before fading. Pikachu watched one dissolve and smiled inwardly, not with expression, but with stillness. The journey home called gently in the distance, not as a command, but as a natural next step. Somewhere beyond the forest and fields lay the familiar town, the quiet hum of life beginning its daily rhythm. Ash would be waking soon, stretching, yawning, calling for breakfast. The thought brought warmth, not in nostalgia, but in presence. Everything connected, every choice, every path, every quiet refusal. The Thunderstone had not been left behind. It had been understood. Change was not something to chase. It was something to live, one breath at a time. The breeze picked up slightly, carrying with it the faint scent of the sea. The ocean was far, but its presence reached everywhere in this world. The smell reminded Pikachu of distant shores, of storms weathered and calm returned. It leapt down from the log and continued along the trail. The trees thinned once more, and soon the forest gave way to a slope that overlooked a valley. Far below, Pikachu could see the rooftops of Pallet Town, the place where its journey had begun so long ago. The sight stirred something deep and steady, not excitement, but a quiet fullness. The small houses, the winding dirt paths, the fields of grass swaying in the wind, it was all the same, and yet entirely new. The sun now stood higher, bathing the valley in gold. Smoke rose from chimneys, faint and curling. The morning sounds of human life drifted upward. The clatter of breakfast dishes, distant laughter, the rhythmic creak of wooden wheels on dirt. Pikachu began the descent. Each step felt lighter. The earth here was warm, the air scented with home, sweet and soft, tinged with the faint fragrance of flowers from nearby gardens. Butterfree drifted lazily above, their wings catching the sunlight like pieces of stained glass. As Pikachu reached the edge of the fields, the grass gave way to soft, familiar dirt paths. The sound of its paws on the earth matched the slow, steady rhythm of its heart. Everything pulsed in harmony. The land, the air, the living breath of morning. The old oak tree at the edge of town came into view. Its broad trunk and wide shade marked the threshold between wild nature and the quiet hum of human life. Pikachu paused there, just for a moment. The tree's branches swayed gently, leaves whispering against one another. It had stood there since the beginning, witnessing every return, every departure. Its roots reached deep into the same earth Pikachu had walked for years, its life intertwined with every small story the town held. Beneath that tree, Pikachu stopped and sat again, feeling the texture of bark beneath its paw. The world was fully awake now. Sunlight bright, sounds abundant, yet nothing disturbed the peace it carried. The inner stillness remained untouched, unbroken. It closed its eyes, briefly, and listened, not just with ears, but with the whole of being. There was the distant sound of the sea again, the laughter of people, the gentle hum of wind and leaves. All of it existed within the same rhythm it had come to understand as life itself. Pikachu opened its eyes. The path forward continued, winding gently toward the lab, toward familiar faces, and a life it knew well. But this time, the journey would not be one of searching. It would be one of sharing. The quiet presence it now held would ripple outward, unseen, but deeply felt. The sun rose higher still, its light turning from gold to white. The morning was no longer beginning. It was fully alive. Pikachu stood, the spark on its cheeks catching the sun's reflection for an instant. Then it began walking again, toward the town, toward the day, carrying within it the silence of the lake, the calm of the stars, and the truth of the dawn. Every step was evolution. The sun had fully claimed the sky. Its warmth pressed gently against the earth, waking every color into brightness. The grass gleamed with renewed light, and the air shimmered faintly where the heat began to rise from the soil. The world hummed softly, not with sound, but with vitality. Everything seemed to breathe in unison. Pikachu followed the winding path that led toward the lab. The route was familiar, worn smooth by years of footsteps, ashes, Professor Oak's, and many others who had passed through the threshold between home and adventure. The sight of it carried no nostalgia, only continuity. It was not returning to where things began. It was stepping once more into what had never truly ended. Ahead, the white curve of the lab's roof glinted in the sunlight. The building rose modestly from the hill, surrounded by its garden of herbs and small flowers, the same ones the professor tended each morning. The soft buzz of bee drill from the nearby orchard drifted through the breeze. The smell of warm soil and cut grass filled the air. Pikachu slowed as it approached, not from hesitation, but from reverence. The instinctive quiet that comes when stepping into a place of meaning. The wooden steps creaked under its small paws, and as it reached the open doorway, the cool interior greeted it with a wave of familiar stillness. Inside, the hum of machines was gentle, rhythmic. Papers rested in neat stacks across the professor's desk. The faint aroma of tea hung in the air. A single window, half open, allowed the morning light to spill across the room in a wide beam of gold dust. Pikachu paused at the threshold, its eyes following the light to the far corner where a single thunderstone rested on a low shelf. The surface of the stone caught the light differently than before. No longer a lure, no longer a question, only an object at rest, glowing softly with its own quiet purpose. The sight stirred nothing of conflict, only gratitude. What once represented choice now represented understanding. It was not rejection that had defined Pikachu's path, but awareness, an acceptance of its own rhythm, of the unique current that flowed through its existence. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from another room. Slow, deliberate, steady. Then the familiar shape of Professor Oak appeared in the doorway. His posture carried the same calm wisdom it always had, his hands resting behind his back, his gaze soft and thoughtful. He did not speak. He didn't need to. His eyes met Pikachu's, and in that single moment, the silence between them became language. It was the silence of comprehension, the kind that exists only between those who have both seen something beyond words. He nodded once, slowly, a gesture of recognition rather than greeting. Pikachu returned the gesture with a quiet dip of its head. No words, no sound. The exchange was complete, and it was enough. Oak turned slightly, looking toward the open window. The sunlight caught his glasses and flashed, briefly connecting him to the same golden thread of morning that filled the world outside. He looked back at Pikachu once more, then smiled faintly before returning to his work. Pikachu stepped fully into the room. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of parchment and dust. It walked past the desk and moved toward the window, where the breeze carried in the scent of the fields below. The view stretched far, rolling hills, the glitter of the lake, the faint shimmer of the path it had followed to return. Everything it had seen was visible from here, all within sight, yet infinite in memory. The lake's surface, the stars of the night, the reflection that had taught it stillness, all now belonged to the same world it had left and returned to. Pikachu climbed onto the windowsill and sat quietly. The morning air brushed its fur, lifting it gently, its eyes half closed, not in weariness but in peace. Outside, the day continued to unfold. Children's laughter, carried faintly from the village below. The sound of a far-off Talo echoed, high and soft. A gentle hum came from the machines behind, blending seamlessly with the living world beyond the window. Everything was one motion now, steady, complete, undivided. The spark within Pikachu stirred. Not a flash, not a burst, just a pulse. A single measured thrum of energy that traveled through its body like a heartbeat made of light. It radiated outward, unseen yet tangible, merging with the sunlight around it. For a moment, it imagined the lake again. The still surface. The perfect reflection. It saw the image ripple, fade, and reform. And it knew that the reflection had never truly disappeared. It had simply changed form, as everything in the world did. A breeze moved through the room, lifting a few loose papers from the professor's desk. They drifted slowly toward the window, catching the light as they floated past Pikachu. One came to rest gently at its feet, a small page of handwritten notes. The writing was careful, precise. A description of electric conductivity patterns in different Pokémon forms. The words were clear, scientific. But beneath them was something else. Curiosity touched with reverence. The same quiet wonder that Pikachu had come to understand in itself. Pikachu looked at the page for a moment, then let the wind take it again. The paper lifted and fluttered out into the sunlight, disappearing into the open air. The movement left behind a sense of perfect balance, of letting go, of trust in the rhythm that guided all things. The sunlight had shifted slightly now, turning from gold to a clean, steady white. The warmth filled the room, the kind that feels eternal even though it always changes. Pikachu stretched once, feeling the soft pull of muscles that had carried it through valleys, forests, and endless nights. There was no fatigue left, only quiet energy, the kind that did not burn but endured. It turned its gaze outward once more. From the height of the window, the whole of Pallet Town seemed to glow. Smoke from chimneys curled lazily upward, catching the light and dispersing into the air. Fields rippled like the ocean, and in the distance, beyond everything, the faintest shimmer of the sea itself reflected the morning sun. The same sea that had carried Lugia's song, the same winds that had touched the jellyfish fields, the same sky that had held every dream and storm. It was all connected. Every story, every path, every spark. Pikachu closed its eyes and let the breeze move through its fur one final time. The hum within its body deepened, aligning perfectly with the pulse of the world. It was no longer separate from it, no longer a single current within the stream, but the stream itself, endless, patient, complete. Somewhere below, a familiar voice called its name, soft, distant, but unmistakable. Pikachu opened its eyes and turned its head toward the sound. The figure running up the hill was small at first, then clearer. The red cap, the stride, the unmistakable energy of youth. Ash. The morning light glowed behind him, framing his outline in brilliance. The air between them shimmered faintly with warmth and memory. Pikachu didn't move right away. It watched, calm and content, as its oldest companion climbed the hill, breath quick, eyes bright, with recognition and joy. The sound of his footsteps was light against the earth. When he reached the tree near the lab, he paused, catching his breath, scanning the space. Their eyes met. No words were needed. The silence that followed was deeper than any sound. The same silence that had filled the lake, the same that had carried through the stars. In that space between them, there was everything. Years of journeys, countless battles, endless laughter, shared growth. Ash smiled. The kind of smile that belongs only to homecoming. Pikachu jumped lightly from the windowsill and landed on the ground below. The spark on its cheeks glowed, faintly as it trotted forward. They met in the sunlight, shadow and light merging, the breeze carrying the scent of earth and the memory of rain. Ash crouched, and Pikachu climbed effortlessly onto his shoulder, as it always had. Together, they stood facing the open world, the fields, the sea, the far horizon. The same horizon that had once promised adventure now promised peace. For a long time, They simply breathed together. The world turned softly around them. The wind stirred the grass. A distant flock of wingull passed overhead, their cries faint but bright in the clear air. The sound faded into the distance, leaving only the hum of life that filled the day. And as the sun rose higher, Pikachu felt the spark within it pulse once more, not as electricity, but as being. It understood, fully now, what evolution truly was. Not change in form, but the eternal movement of becoming oneself, again and again. In every moment of awareness, the wind settled, the sunlight glowed, and the world, for that instant, felt perfectly still.